Peter Van Dyck, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better. So, where are you right now? I read your bio and it said you live in two places. If I remember right, Philadelphia, and then now I can't remember the second place.
Alabama.
Okay, where are you right now?
I'm in Philadelphia.
Okay.
I'm mostly in Philadelphia. Yeah, I mean, we're in Philadelphia for the school year for the most part, and then we're in Alabama for the summer, which is not the optimal time to be in Alabama.
Yeah,
but,
what the heck's that all
it's
about?
the way. Well, you know, I kind of operate on a school year calendar, so that's just the way it works out. You know?
Are you teaching in Philadelphia? Is that why you're in Philly during the school year?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm from Philly, and I came back here after going to school. But my wife is from Alabama, from the deep middle of nowhere, Alabama. So we spend time down there. We built a studio, kind of like a studio / barn house thing that we live in when we're down there. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm mostly here. I mean, we have our primary studios here and our primary houses here in Philly. And, you know, I'm teaching pretty much the whole school year. And then during the summer, I'm floating around doing workshops and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. So where do you teach?
The Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts.
Oh, you do? No kidding. That's awesome. We've talked a lot about PAFA, so this is great.
I know.
Are you following the podcast? I'm not offended if you're not. But, okay.
Well, no. You know, it was Chris Tejan's interview that onto this, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So
okay, I'm glad you brought him up, because I wanted to ask you about whether or not you know him, because I know you're kind of in similar. You live in a similar area. I can't remember how close he is to Philly, but I know he lives in that general area.
He's not too far now, but I had a strange overlap with him. I've never met him, actually. But when I first was in Philly, when I was back in Philly after school, I was looking at PAFA and I was, you know, just seeing the work there. And he was somebody whose work I was particularly interested in. He was graduating at the time. And he actually lived out near where I live now. But I never actually crossed paths with him. He just kind of, I don't know, he kind of disappeared off the scene that I was aware of, at least. And I just hadn't heard from him until, I hadn't seen anything he'd done until recently when we were in a show together out in Lancaster or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting on your podcast. I thought that was great.
I know. He's an interesting character. He's sort of kind of living in his own world. You know, it's like yeah, I mean, he doesn't really promote himself much, and yet he's got this great living. He's an interesting character, a really cool guy. Yeah, you should get to know him. Yeah, that's one of the other reason I wanted to ask you about him. And we'll get into your painting more, but you guys have some things in common. You have a similar aesthetic, kind of.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, he comes a little bit, I think, from a tradition of something that's I saw first through PAFA, which was a kind of a kind of painting that had a lot to do with your immediate environment, you know, and trying to sort of make something out of what you have. At least that's what I got from it. And so that was very inspiring to me when I first saw it. I had not seen much work like that. You know, I had been at an atelier, which doesn't really address that very much, you know, sort of, it's a lot to do with kind of manipulating and I don't mean that in a bad way, but sort of managing your environment until it's, you know, just the way you need it, and then painting it, you know.
Right.
That just wasn't working for me. And so when I saw what he was doing, I thought, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, you're bringing up all kinds of stuff, because I was looking through your website. I was noticing, what did you label it? Ancient work, I think? Like under past work, it says ancient.
Yeah. I'm trying to distance myself from it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. It was, I mean, it was good work too, but now that you mentioned you went to an atelier and then you went to PAFA, and the differences in your experience between the two, as far as subject matter, it's so obvious when you compare your ancient to your current. And I'll pull that up in a bit, but
I should point out, I actually didn't go to PAPA. What happened, I had taken some continuing ed classes there at the end of my high school time. And then I went to an atelier, and then I came back to Philly and I started teaching at PAFA. Sort of, I guess, I'm not sure how, or why that happened. I mean, I think it was I think that it was what I had learned in my atelier training that was appealing to the people who brought me on there. And then, I've learned probably fully half, if not 3/4 of whatever it is that I know about painting during teaching at PAFA. I mean, I
No
effectively
kidding.
go to, yeah, I mean, because I didn't know, not that I know much now, but I mean, I don't know. I just didn't have much experience at all. And I hadn't seen really at all what was possible. And it's a kind of a humbling and slightly embarrassing experience to be learning on the fly like that, but it's been worth it, to have a community where, your students are doing stuff that's like much more interesting than what you're doing. And you have to deal with that.
But I mean, there is that old cliche that students learn more than or teachers learn more than their students. And I think that's true, right?
Yeah.
To some degree.
Yeah. Well, and I think you feel like you're supposed to be, like you're supposed to know what you're doing, and I think that's hard for people to kind of get their head around. They want you to give them some definitive answer. And, if you're honest, you really can't do that,
Yeah. And then there are just obscure things. Like there's this one kid who I teach. Well, he's not a kid. He's a man, but man, I sound like an old dude now. There's this one guy that I teach who he's like a chronic online shopper. And it seems like at least once a week he comes in and says, Jeff, I found the ultimate pencil or the ultimate sharpener or this new color or, or something, or this new palette. And I've bought so much stuff that's really cool because of him. And that's not technically a drawing principle or painting principle, but I've applied those tools in such a way that they do affect my painting. I mean, it's just things you can't possibly know everything. Students are going to bring that stuff with them.
Yeah. And it's just nice to have, other people in your life, I guess. I don't think I would have anybody other than my wife and my son. Like I don't think I'd see people if I didn't do that, I didn't have to teach. And so, I'm kind of not resigned, but I've accepted that there's just no way I can stop teaching. I don't know what I'd do,
Yeah.
I mean, I would be like totally lost.
Yeah. You sound like me. I mean, I just got interviewed on John Dalton's podcast, and that's one of the things I said to him. Mm-hmm. It was one of the reasons I teach is just to have people, just to have a community. 'Cause I'm not one of those people that can be sitting alone in a studio all day. I'd go stir crazy.
Yeah. Well, I had this slightly, uncomfortable realization recently that I'm hopelessly addicted to the attention as well. Like, and I'm not,
that's very transparent of you.
Well, I'm not kidding. I thought about this, like you've probably been teaching a really long time.
Yeah.
Right?
I have.
Right. Okay. And I've been teaching a really long time, much longer than I should have been. I mean, I started teaching before I really was qualified in any way, if I'm qualified now. And you just take for granted that, like, people are paying attention to you, like, all the time. You really do get used to that. And you get used to being a center of attention. And, that's just, I don't know. I mean, I'm not proud of that, but it's true, and so I don't know. I just realized, like, oh man, I don't know. I couldn't do it. I couldn't quit now.
Dude, I can't believe you admitted that. I have to admit, I'm gonna come clean. I enjoy it too, but
yeah. Well,
but
I think
dude,
we
the
all,
Undraped artist, you heard it here. You were emotionally naked right now.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great. Okay. Well, let's go back a little bit. before your education, before you started teaching. Tell me about your childhood and how you ended up becoming an artist.
Well, I guess I grew up in Philly in a very nice neighborhood with very nice parents. And I went to private school my whole life, basically. That's the sort of, I guess, blessed existence that I've had. And I should say, without that, again, if we're going to come clean, if I hadn't had the resources that my folks had, there's no way I'd be a painter. I mean, I marvel at the people who have the courage to put their comfort and and whatever, put it on the line to pursue something like this. I don't kid myself for 1 second that I would have been one of those people. I'd be the first guy in business school, if I thought that I was going to need to be, And so
wait, I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand, because I am one of those people that grew up in a poor family. We didn't have a lot. We weren't like so poor that I couldn't go to college. We could afford the application fees barely. But I'm curious how my life is any different than yours. I don't feel like I missed out on opportunities. So I think the only reason I ask is because maybe you're being too humble, that maybe you could have been an artist otherwise.
I'm not, I certainly don't want to be unrealistically humble, because I don't think that's any better than being arrogant. I'm trying to be realistic. I don't think that maybe, it's possible. I know though that having certain things taken care of for you puts a different kind of existential pressure on you, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you get the feeling that like you're not going to have to fight for much in life, and you're not going to have to, you're not going to live the life that is sort of self-fulfilling in the sense that you feel like you're really doing something, or that you have achieved something that gives you worth, that drove me to need to do something that I could feel like I had done myself, to the degree that anybody can do something themselves, truly. Like I needed to have something that was mine that, couldn't really be gotten for me by somebody else. And so it put me in this mode of like, I've got to do something. And it just happened to be painting, because at the time in my life when I was really having to figure out what I was going to do, that was the thing that I was interested in. But, when I was 10, I wanted to be a hockey player. And when I was 16, I wanted to be a skateboarder.
We have all the same interests, Pete, by the way.
Really?
I also played hockey and skateboarded. Yeah.
Well, there is almost no analogy between skateboarding and art that I will not use. I'm convinced that skateboarding and painting are just absolutely the same thing, except one is physically way more dangerous than the other. Yeah. So I can't separate, my upbringing in that sense from what I ended up doing. It was because my folks were, had resources that I felt the pressure to achieve something, and that put me in the direction of painting, and then also it gave me the comfort to feel like, well, I'll be okay, like I'm not going to get kicked out on the street. So
are you saying that your parents had resources that made you feel the pressure to achieve something, but usually that pressure would become a doctor or a lawyer so that you could be like your parents, yeah. Right? It's usually like the rebellious kid who's going to be a loser that's like, Dad, I realize you make X dollars a year as an attorney, but I want to, I want to be a painter, or I want to have my own band or whatever. And then your parents are chronically disappointed in you. So
that's a really good. Yeah. Well, that reminds me of the in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I think, where they're dealing with this kid who's going to inherit all this land, and his dad is trying to tell him, he's like, son, and all he wants to do is sing. And so he keeps interrupting his dad and saying, "What, father? All I want to do is sing." And that's like, I think
that's how I imagine it turning out.
Yeah. No, that's funny, because both of my folks were like, I think they really, you know, they kind of showed, they set the example that you know, that doing things well was intrinsically valuable, you know, and that working was good for its own, you know, in its own right, for its own sake. And so, yeah, it's funny. I just, it wasn't, it didn't seem rebellious at all. I don't know. It didn't, but also my mom especially was really, really promoted, you know, music and art and stuff like that in our lives. So it's funny. My older brother is an architect, and my younger brother is an orchestra musician.
So they're a musician and a painter, and they weren't chronically disappointed. Yeah.
No. I think, well, at least if they were, they did a very good job of hiding it.
So it sounds to me like it's not the difference between your upbringing and my upbringing isn't that you had means, but that the means might have led to culture and more knowledge about the possibilities in the world, which led to doors being open to you. Because my parents, they also believed that hard work was important in and of itself, but they had no concept that art and music and cultural things had any value, because to them, the only thing that mattered was having enough money to keep the lights on. Right. So
no, there's that. Oh, yeah. Let me be clear. There's no, I'm not in any way implying that that a work ethic is a class-based thing.
No, I know you're not. I know you're not.
But no. Here's the thing. What I think the difference was that it being, I think I had very low self-esteem because of that, you know.
Okay.
And so this is actually my biggest fear about painting and my painting. I mean, and my art is that I actually don't like painting. I just did it for self-esteem. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my biggest fear. More than whether I'm any good or whether anybody likes my work or sees my work. There's nothing that worries me more than that I actually don't like painting. And all I really want is to prove something to myself. Because if you don't really like painting, then there's simply, you shouldn't be doing it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
You know? So I these days I'm less worried about that. I really think for the first time in my life, I actually feel like no, I really like painting, you know, and this was the right thing for me to do, you know? So I had this thought recently that, about that, because I actually get distressed when I feel like I'm forcing myself. Because the fact is I don't have to paint. Like I could just not paint, you know, just not do anything. And so I feel a lot of pressure to actually enjoy what I'm doing, which sounds ridiculous when you say it, but it's true. Mm-hmm. Because I don't have that kind of workman-like approach that most like professionals have, it's made me kind of develop a way of painting that's always fun for me. So see, like if I had grown up and like had to do things that I didn't want to do, I would get used to doing that. Like I would have been like, oh yeah, this is boring, but I keep going. Mm-hmm. But this is how terrible I am. If I get bored, I'm like, I'm not doing this, you know?
Right.
And so, because I don't have to, you know, like, and right. So in painting is the same way. Like, so I paint the way I paint because it's the way that keeps me interested. And if you ever, like, I've done like recordings, like demos of myself for my students. And when I watch what I'm doing, it makes so little sense. It just looks insane. And I think, oh yeah, that makes sense to me because I can tell that like I'm bored with that. And so now I'm doing that part, now I'm doing that, and now I'm doing that. So it's almost like that's my mandate is to like be engaged in what I'm doing, you know? It's because for me, I can't think of another reason to do it, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm amazed. I'm absolutely amazed by the work ethic and just, you know, consistency that somebody, especially like yourself, is able to. This is totally alien to me. I don't think I could do it.
Oh, I've given you a false impression. about
Well,
myself.
you've done a good job. But
No,
you,
I mean, I do have to feed the family, but what, we also have this in common. Teaching, obviously you don't have to paint because you teach. You can teach and you're able to, I'm assuming either you or you and your wife are able to support your family without painting because of that. But I also teach, and it also frees me up to be in a position where I don't have to get to the easel every day. Like I do have
yeah,
another income. And so I know exactly what you're saying. And there are days where I'm just not doing it. It's just not in me. And
yeah,
I'll probably mess it up if I even try because I'm just not into it. So I totally get what you're saying.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot more pressure on your results than there is on mine, though. I mean, um, and I'm not, I can't be, if I'm results oriented, I just really have I just do really badly, you know.
Hmm.
But, that's why my work is so incredibly erratic, I think. I mean, it's just, I just paint and then like, oh, well, that turned into something or that didn't. And uh, I have really no idea what's going to become of anything that I start. And so, but if somebody said, "Hey, paint this for me," I don't know if I could do it. At least, certainly not reliably. And I don't think I
Yeah.
could do anything I liked, uh, because if there's anything that I like in my work, it's like stuff that surprises me. Like, oh, hey, look at that, and you can't plan that.
Yeah.
It just has.
Yeah. No, that is where we're different because I actually enjoy commissions where someone gives me at least a small parameter. I don't like to be bound, but a small parameter like this is my family. I enjoy those because it's a starting point. So commissions can be great for me as long as the client says, here's my family, or here's this particular scripture story, run with it. But if they're like, we want this person here, we want that person there, we want this color clothing, we want that there, we want, it's like, okay, I'm done. It's not happening.
That's a good point about parameters because I actually do feel like I need parameters. And I think that's why I'm very kind of like situational painter. Like I'm going to sit here. Okay, those are my parameters.
Yeah.
So I do definitely feel the need to constrain that. And so that's like, all right, whatever I can experience while I'm in this spot, this is what I'm going to deal with. But um, yeah, I can't imagine being micromanaged.
Oh, it's awful.
The paradox of a commission it seems is that I've done one commission, by the way. That's it. If that's and that was never asked again. But it's like somebody saying, "I want you to be you, but I want you to be you the way I want you to be."
I
It's like
know. It's exactly
it's
like
very
that.
weird. It's very weird. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's great the position that you've put yourself in where you can just paint when you want to paint what you want to paint, how you want to paint it, and when it's fun. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and no, it's awesome. There's just no denying that. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, so as a kid, you've told me a little about your family life. At what point did you decide that you wanted to become a painter?
I think when I was about maybe like 18 or 19, I
That's
spent a
kind of
year.
late.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't really start getting interested in it until I was, I think, about 16. And then uh, I went to I went to a regular college for a year. That was kind of the deal. And I was going to go to college. I think my folks were, expecting that. And so I went for a year and I was very unhappy. And I just felt like this is not what I want to do. I'm not, it was college with a good art program. I think you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was so not adequate for me. And so I managed to convince my parents to let me take a year to go get this art thing sort of sorted out, and then I'd find something and I'd be like, okay, that's good. I can come back and get back to college. But so I went to I actually enrolled at PAFA and went for about a week. or maybe like a month or something. And then I got into the Florence Academy, which was like what I really wanted to do. And so I left and went to the Florence Academy. And then instead of, so I managed to get myself over there. You know, my mom was like, yeah, okay, we can do that for a year. And then the year went by, and it was sort of like, okay, I'm not coming back, you know. And so I did.
So why is that? Did funds run out, or you just weren't into it, or what?
No. I there was no, you know, no funding problem or anything like that. It was just, I decided that I just couldn't go back to college, you know, like I was going to stay in Florence. And I had to learn.
Oh, I thought you meant you weren't going back to Florence. So you weren't going back to college. You wanted to stay in Florence.
Right.
Gotcha.
And, ironically, going to Florence back then was like 1/50th the cost of going to college. You know, it's not like, I don't know what it is now, but I think tuition was like $1,000 a semester. So it was something crazy.
Wow.
Like, you know, yeah, it was just, it was run out of like an old shop, and it was just run by, you know, a guy who wanted to teach people painting. It was no frills. It was all business. And so there wasn't a lot of overhead, and it was great. So I stayed there. And then I came back to Philly when my, you know, I was kind of done there. My wife, who we were not married then, but she wanted to come back to the States, and my best friend wanted to come back, and I just didn't want to stay there without them. So that's why I came back.
Right. I just have to take a minute to thank each one of my generous patrons for your part in keeping this podcast going. I could not continue to do it without you, so thank you so much. If you're not a patron yet, but you love the show and you listen regularly, please consider becoming a patron. It's really easy to do, and it doesn't have to break the bank. Just head over to the undrapedartist.com and click on the link, Be My Patron on Podbean. And then choose a monthly donation amount that fits your budget. It's that simple. And to thank you for your generous donations, once you've reached $100 in total contributions, send me an email to theundrapedartist@gmail.com, and I will send you one of our spectacular Undraped Artist aprons. So is your wife an artist too then? Did you meet her in Florence?
She is. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
She is. Yep.
Okay. What's her name?
Carolyn Pyfrom.
I have to look her up.
She's mostly a figure and portrait painter. And so, yeah, she has a studio that's just above mine. And yeah, it's great. It's a good deal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So then when you finished at Florence, what was your next move?
Back in with my mom was my next move.
Okay.
And so I had not really thought about what I was going to do. I didn't have any plan. So both Carol and I came to Philly, and we rented studios, and we just tried to pick up where we left off in Florence. Like, we recreated the environment, the studio environment that was there. We kept the same hours. We painted the same things. It was just like, how can we keep the Florence experience happening here in Philadelphia, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did for years. I mean, we got an apartment and had these other studios and stuff. And then she started teaching at PAFA, and then I started teaching there, and then we both started teaching there. And then, yeah, so we were just in Philly working in these studios, and that was that. And eventually we bought this house where we are now, and we have studios out here, and I'm never leaving.
Really?
Because we've just put so much into. I tell people that I'm moving out of here in a body bag, because there's no way that I'm going to move otherwise. You know, like, it's just, you know, you work so hard to get yourself situated in something that will last and work long term, and so this place is just too good of a setup, you know.
Really? Can you expound on that a little bit? What is it about it that you don't think you could replicate easily?
First of all, the neighborhood. So we live in a part of Philly that's outside of the center, and it's in a very hilly area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a place that has been, you know, it's had a few different attempts at gentrification. And, you know, it's an old working class mill town. And because of the variety of uses of the buildings. Like there were factory buildings, and then there were blocks of row homes, and then somebody came in and bulldozed a bunch and built some condos, whatever. So the place is just madness, you know. And that combined with the topographical, you know, the nature of the place makes it visually very, very interesting. If you go downtown in Philly, it's, you know, it's a gridded, planned city. Center city is. Buildings are the same height across everything. It's built on a perpendicular grid, all the same level. Visually, it's just unbelievably, well, I hate to say it's boring. I mean, you could paint there, but it's not nearly as exciting to me as this place. I think this is like a little Italian hill town to me. So
really, oh man, you're making me jealous.
I love it. Yeah. Oh, it's very, very cool. So, you know, for a painter who cares about space and, you know, I guess sort of the gesture of space, it's just great. You know, there's nowhere else I'd rather live, really.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's not, I assumed it was that you've built a studio that you don't want to start over or anything, but it's more about the location. Oh, it's that too.
Yeah, so we actually bought the place because there were these two old buildings in the back. Because Philly went through a phase when we first got here where all of the old industrial buildings were being rented out as studios, and they were amazing. It was like $300 a month for this huge Northlight space.
Wow.
But then the condo boom came through and just like turned all those into condos, and all of a sudden there were no studios left. And so it became clear that the only thing to do was to buy a house and build studios. So we do have studios in the back, which are great. I love my studio. I'm not in there now because my wife is working. I didn't want to bother her.
Oh man, it'd be fun to see it. So is the studio an old building behind your house or something you built behind your house?
It was an old building, and then we renovated it to be, you know, a studio basically.
And has it got north windows or anything like that?
My wife's part does. My light is just all over the place. It's got like west and south, and then I have everything but north, actually.
Yeah, but you're doing landscape anyway. So either you're outside or you're working from photos.
Well, I paint a lot of interiors, actually. I haven't been painting a lot of outdoor paintings lately.
That's true. You do a lot of interiors, yeah.
But yeah, it's funny. I've become much more, you know, I guess hermetic is the word, like kind of like more and more making my arena of space like smaller and smaller. So I just like the apertures, like having all these different apertures like to look out through. And I like the chaos. And I'm not a figure painter, so I don't need like the consistency of the light. I would actually get kind of I don't think I really like the light if it were consistent, you know.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, yeah, that makes sense. That's why she would get it. She's the figure painter.
Yeah.
So it works out good for you guys.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool. You know, I don't know if you know, but I'm originally from upstate New York, just about 50 miles from the city. So when you talk about the rolling hills and the beautiful old neighborhoods, it's making me really homesick. So thanks for that, by the way.
You're welcome.
Now you're at PAFA. Maybe this is a good transition into your work. So let me pull up that. First of all, I mean, I wouldn't have you on the podcast if this wasn't the case, because I only get people who I absolutely love their work, but I just have to tell you, I absolutely love your work. It is so beautiful. And one of the things I love about it is I have this studio. You can kind of see it behind me, but it's all lit with blue light. So it's not very, not the way it typically looks, but it's just a lot of stuff, a lot of tools, a lot of stuff. It's not one of those studios that's got a fireplace and a little sitting area like a lot of classical painters might have. And I've often toyed around with the idea of doing interiors, but I'm like, but my studio's not pretty. But
yeah,
that's one of the things I want to talk about with you is you take the most ordinary spaces, and in fact, beyond ordinary. Frankly, that's a linoleum floor and a drop ceiling. I mean, could that be a less interesting space? And I want that painting in my house. And
you can have it.
Thank you, man. I'll give you my address after. It's so cool. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. First of all, what draws you to these ordinary spaces? And second, what is it that you believe is the key to making them less than ordinary in a painting?
I mean, it's kind of a philosophical question that gets into the painting. So, and it gets a little bit back to the Florence thing. So, you know, I went to Florence, and everything there is like beautiful, you know,
Right.
And has character and just kind of feels full of life and history and all the things that make you feel good, you know?
Right.
And it's charming. And then, you know, I came back to Philly, and I was just like, what do I do with this? And I had the studio, and I was really trying to basically, like I said earlier, kind of manipulate the world into looking like it did in Florence. And, you know, I was trying to make things that were beautiful, set up things that were beautiful, and then paint them. And I found that I had to be so closed to what was around me. You know, so much of my life was about trying to manage things that were not really in my control. And I kind of think that one of the great blessings of painting or any kind of autonomous art is that, you know, you can, if you do it a certain way, there's really nothing that matters that's really beyond your control. And so I hadn't seen work that I really liked that sort of addressed the world that I found myself in. And then but then I started seeing it being made at PAFA. I hadn't seen, say, the work of, I mean, I'd seen a little bit of something like Antonio Lopez, a little bit, or, you know, Richard Mowry was another person, but he lived in Florence. But I just hadn't seen people make this world. I didn't see how it could be beautiful, you know. And then when you see somebody deploy their poetic powers on the world, it becomes beautiful. I actually would say that I'm not sure we would think Italy was so beautiful if not for like Corot having painted it. You know,
You don't think?
I actually think. Well, I mean, I think that a lot of the time, until things have been kind of given a form, it's
Wait,
hard
are you
to
saying
appreciate.
form or forum?
Form.
Okay, FORM.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's hard to see, like, because the place or the subject has to go through this kind of transformation into being into the realm of poetry, I think, and then when it's seen poetically, then it gets like pushed back into the world. Like then you can experience the world that way. So that's why I kind of had to see examples of this. And my friend Scott Noel was a great example of this. He was just painting the stuff that was around, and it struck a chord. I thought, no, this has everything that I like about painting in it, but it's not of what I was used to painting. You know.
Before you go on, I want to address what you had said about whether or not Italy would be beautiful if it wasn't for Corot. Because I've thought a lot about that. You know, and you get these, I can't remember where I've seen them, but maybe on the internet or in magazines or something, where people have this discussion about whether or not the way we perceive human beauty is a genetic thing that we're all programmed with, or whether it's cultural. I don't think anyone's ever solved that question, but that you could apply the same thing to architecture and nature and frankly anything. Is there something that we're all programmed to appreciate as being beautiful and we all agree on to a point? I mean, obviously there's gonna be outliers, or isn't there? I don't know. But here's the question with that in mind. First a statement of my own thoughts. And then a question. So if this painting that is right here, it's beautiful and I would hang it in my house, but I don't care how long I look at this painting, I will never decorate my bathroom like that. Right?
Yeah, nobody would.
But so I hope that's not your bathroom and I didn't offend you.
No. Well, I can tell you what, it is my bathroom and it doesn't offend me in the least. I'm actually one of those people. I I actually don't believe in offense. That's so you're safe in that,
Well, I apologize anyway, but I wouldn't intentionally decorate my bathroom with linoleum floors and a drop
Sure.
ceiling. But I would, if I saw a painting of certain areas in Europe, I would aspire to that, right? Regardless of if it had been painted. So I wonder why that is. Is it something, is it because we've been programmed to see that? Or is there something innate about the beauty of certain objects or certain proportions or something? I mean, have you thought much about that?
I don't know. Yeah, too much probably. I I mean, this is an age-old question. You know, what of this is somehow, you know, I mean, it's sort of a nature nurture question, I suppose. Uh, yeah, I think though that the question of seeing something that's beautiful, like that thing out there is beautiful, and then trying to quite like capture it, you know, that's not painting to me. That's not how I don't see painting that way for myself. It's because there's nothing that I could imagine myself being able to capture. You know, there's a feeling to the world that I suppose I'm trying to capture. But when I'm in Italy, for example, I'm not sure I would be able to in any way make a painting that would do justice to what I like there. And you know, maybe it's just a total fear of failure. I mean, if you see the thing and then you make something and you go, well, this isn't what I wanted to do. So I see it much more as sort of making something kind of from the ground up. Yeah.
So
that's why I can't.
So you're like maybe thinking start with low expectations and then you can only improve on it. So pick a tabletop with nothing interesting on it and I can only make it better. I'm not going to fail.
Well, sort of. I mean, so this is actually, I kind of reverse the, this is something about representational work that I think is maybe I think about a little differently than some folks, is that the notion is that there's the world out there, like,
right.
And the world has these things in it. And when I paint the world, there's what's real, there's this objective truth to that. And I'm going to then sort of select, I can just get it all on there and maybe kind of edit it out a little bit. But there is no editing, because the way I see it is you don't have the world, you have an empty canvas. Like, that's the fact. That's the first fact. And the world is material to, it's to sort of to work with. So to me, the initial appetite, it does have to do with what's there, but the first fact is the painting, and that's what I think you're trying to make into the new fact. Like,
right.
The bathroom isn't the same anymore. And so, I guess to me, it's about seeing painted possibility, and I liken it a lot to what I imagine a good stand-up comedian is like, because, if you know somebody who's really funny and they're always telling stories about stuff that happened to them, and you think, well, just this funnier stuff happens to them, but it doesn't. It's the same stuff that happens to you. It's just that, you don't have the lens on it to see how funny it could be.
Oh, that's a great analogy. I like that.
And so that's what I would call poetic power. Like, is what can you do with this?
Right.
Like how, what can you make out of this that would actually redeem the banality of what it literally is, and that's why, some of the funniest things you'll ever hear are just stories about like grocery shopping or something like that.
Yeah. That makes me think of this person I follow who plays the spoons. I wish I remembered her name, but she just hits spoons together and she's like some bluegrass musician and it's freaking cool. And and she takes just the most ordinary things and makes the coolest music. I wouldn't call it beautiful. It's just it's different. It's bluegrass. No one calls. Well, do people call bluegrass beautiful? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
It's cool, but yeah. That's a great analogy. You know, and one other thought comes to mind is this is totally different than the way of thinking of, say, the Hudson River School artist, or at least one artist who I named my son after, Thomas Cole, who I think it was him who felt like his job, he felt like God was the ultimate artist and everything beautiful has been made. It's like the landscape is the most beautiful thing. It's made, it's divine. And his job is just to do it justice. I'm totally paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly how to put it. But and yours seems like a more contemporary perspective, which I also like. Yours is, well, it doesn't matter what the world looks like because ultimately the object that matters is the finished painting. And I'm just picking and choosing things in the world almost at random and then letting the painting be its own thing. And that's what matters.
Yeah, that's true. I would say though that I'm very much after what I quote unquote see, the feeling that I have, or the you know, it's not, I don't like to say what I see because people really, what they mean when they say that is they're really talking about what a photograph would see.
Right.
I just, you know, photography in my work has like, I just wouldn't even know what to do with the photograph. Like it just has, it doesn't have anything of what I'm interested in painting in it.
Wait a minute. Wait, you have to be using a photograph here because you're using wide angle lenses, aren't you? Or are you doing this with perspective?
No, I'm just standing there. Or in the case of the bathroom,
out of town.
In the case of the bathroom, literally sitting on the toilet.
Shut up. Wait a minute. All these curves you're doing with perspective drawings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not doing separate drawings of it, but I'm doing it with my understanding and my kind of, what do you call it? Like a way of thinking about space and perspective that makes it possible to incorporate an enormous amount of space into a smaller, you know, like you know, traditional.
You just blew my mind. I honestly was going to ask you what millimeter or what focal length lens you've been using. You had me convinced that you were shooting with a fisheye or like a 14 millimeter lens or something, and then using, dude, I'm impressed.
I don't own a camera, but that is
so freaking cool. I love it.
Well, but this is, you know, what happens is like, okay, when you're somewhere, when I find myself in a space, right, and I'm like, oh, like, because when I'm sitting somewhere, you know, you're seeing into areas, you're feeling the bigness of the space, and then you're seeing details, and then you're kind of tunneling down another space. That being somewhere is this really wild experience of I don't even know how to explain it, but of overlapping sensations, and you know, you're conceptualizing one form, and then it's kind of merging with something else. And so how do you paint that? You know, because it has as much to do with the way you pay attention to certain things as it does anything else. So what I do is I put the canvas in the space, and then I paint. Like, it basically, what you have to do is you have to kind of like look up and look, you know, you have to look around, and then as you pull those various perspectives onto the canvas, they naturally form a what looks like, you know, a fisheye.
Well, for you, they do. I mean,
well,
they would for anyone if you had the mental capacity to put those images together on a two-dimensional surface, 2, the training, 3, the understanding. I mean, there's more to it. It doesn't just happen automatically. You've got some knowledge and some skill to put that together. That's not easy to do.
Well, I mean, I don't have, I actually don't really have much that I would call like formal knowledge, but I mean, from painting a lot and from trying to do the things, you know, you get a certain amount of experience, and I think I do have maybe a slightly above average knack for structure and perspective. I mean, I think I really should
way above average.
Well, I mean, like, the thing that I like, if I weren't a painter, I'd be a carpenter. I mean, I
Yeah.
think this is my nature. And it sort of runs in my family. My dad, can design stuff. My brother's an architect. So there's just, I have a feeling, and I have a feeling, I think, for the way that forms, move and relate to each other in space.
Yeah.
And I don't mean feeling like a talent, but I mean, like, I feel it.
Well, these skills are literally part of IQ tests. I mean, this is not. Oh, yeah.
I have a very low IQ.
You did not. You didn't take an IQ test. No one takes IQ tests.
I did.
You have a low IQ?
Know what it is, but, it was implied. It was implied by actually my parents. But
well, you had to have done well on the shape. I mean, I've only taken them on the internet, and those don't count. But that's the only reason I know what they kind of look like. But I mean, they have different sections, and maybe you failed in like the reading section or something, or the memory section.
Well,
but in the spatial section, yeah, I know, it's just a test. But spatially, your quote unquote IQ, let's just call it your spatial intelligence instead of IQ, has got to be pretty high. I mean, because, it reminds me of Kim Jong-gi. Do you know Kim Jong-gi?
No.
Well, he's a comic book artist that died recently. He's like, I don't know how old you are, but he's like my age, and he just had a heart attack. It's the saddest thing ever.
Ooh.
Yeah. But he makes stuff out of his head, and he does these crazy fisheye perspectives with line work, with ink. And he'll start on the upper corner of an 8-foot piece of paper and start with a hand and end up with an entire mural with ink and never make a mistake in fisheye perspective.
Yeah.
It's insanity. Yeah. And this guy's genius. But now that I know you're not using photos, in a way, it's like you're doing a similar thing, except from observation, but in paint.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to put together, I think, the kind of, the kind of, what would it be called? Something about the best feeling, the best experiences that I have being somewhere,
Yeah.
And I'm very moved by just kind of exploring spaces and seeing the things that are in them, and maybe kind of imagining the kind of the implication of human activity.
Yeah.
This has always been interesting to me. And I just find that sort of fascinating. Like, I look back into the recesses of my studio, and I see these little things back there, and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. It's its own little world, but it's also part of this other big world. And then I can look out the window, and, how do I do some kind of justice to how rich the experience could be if you are sympathetic to it,
Yeah.
And so I'm just so moved by that I feel like all the time. Yesterday I was working on this thing, and I probably didn't really do anything to it. But I was convinced that, like, I was just really in the world, and it's one of those feelings that is so convincing when you have it, that you think, this has got to be the right thing. This has got to be right. You couldn't feel something that strongly, and it could be completely wrong, And so that's, I guess I'm just trying to put together that, and I'll use whatever necessary in terms of, like, thinking about the space and organizing things and letting things move around to try to get at some semblance of that feeling,
I'm looking at the painting and listening to what you're saying, and I see it. But another thing on a different level is, while you are observing, it's interesting how much you're playing with textures and edges that aren't there. So on one hand,
right,
you're really exploring the space and trying to capture the essence of the space. On the other hand, you're moving away from what's in the space and thinking about two-dimensional surface. For example, it's like you get this crazy crisp line right here where you'd predict it to be. And then right along this window edge, the light just spills in like you spilled the blue paint on the canvas, which is just really a bold move that if you were simply trying to capture the space, you wouldn't do, because it's not there.
You're totally right. You're totally right. And well, and I would actually argue that nothing's there really. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
painting is, the world is the world. But that's the trick, I think, is how do you, how can you employ the expressive resources of painting? And they are a thing. There are formal resources that painting has, and the shapes and the flat life of the picture is, to me, that's where it happens. You know, it's something about the locking in of this three-dimensional experience into a constellation of two-dimensional shapes and gestures and textures, that that's what the art of painting is to me. And so the real magic for me in all art is the way that whatever the form is, so whether it's film or music or sculpt, whatever, the way that it lives a dual life, that it sits right on this boundary between what it refers to and what it is, so that like you're simultaneously aware of this experience that's being referenced or being elicited by the, you know, like of being in a room or of whatever the thing is trying to talk about in the world, and then the sort of basic material fact of what you're looking at, paint on canvas or bronze in the sculptural form or something like that. And so that, you know, the way that the language of painting can intersect with the reality of experience, to me, is that's the whole game, you know. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's every bit as much about aesthetic desire as it is about what, quote unquote, what's there.
Right. So obviously composition is important to you because you have beautiful compositions, and I don't think it's an accident, but you're also painting something that's there. And, you know, I assume there's a motorcycle on a lift, and I assume there are canvases and tools and a toolbox and all that.
Yeah.
So how do you balance documenting the space with controlling the composition? Because you can't move the staircase. I mean, can you, or do you? I mean, how do you compose once you've chosen a space, or is at that point that composition over? Like, is choosing the space the composing element?
That's actually something that I've really struggled with. So initially, I think the choosing, like the sort of what I would call the big spatial arrangement of, like, say, the volume of the room, or whatever the sort of different journeys of space there might be, like out a window or up a flight of stairs and then back into the front or whatever it is, that sort of feels that when I start, like, okay, that's just set, you know.
Okay.
And I can't do anything about that. I've been letting the control of that go, I think, lately. But the objects, especially, they live in the space, so that I don't try to keep the space the same way. And so, you know, as I'm painting, as a certain thing registers with me as potentially interesting, it starts to work its way into the painting. And
what do you mean? Give me an example.
Well, so you know, like the water bottle that's over with the orange cap.
Yeah, that is cool.
So, you know, I didn't put that there. But as I was working, you know, I start the day out thinking, oh, I'm going to work on whatever, that little monitor there. And of course, anything that I tell myself I'm going to work on is guaranteed not to get touched. And, you know, I kind of happen upon this other event that just looks really exciting and something that I couldn't have thought of, which is the water bottle. And so I just kind of, oh, look at that. So I just grab the, you know, the orange that I can mix up and slap it on there. And, you know, just because it surprises me, and I want to sort of grab that surprise when it's available. So the things really just enter the painting as they kind of call out, I guess, through the experience of painting. So the light will change and it will hit something in a way and push a contrast that I had never seen before. And I get the feeling that maybe that would, you know, like really just wake up that area of the painting. And I happen to have a color that's suitable for the for the sunlight on my brush. So it's like these crazy, set of almost random circumstances that would cause something to happen. That's how the painting gets made, really, with and it's very chaotic in that sense.
Yeah, it would be. And so I'm looking at this thinking, okay, how would I paint this? This is what I do when I look at my guest paintings. I'm trying to imagine how I would accomplish it. And my biggest struggle would be chasing this light because it's not north. I don't know what direction it is, but it's moving because it's direct. And you can't just make this stuff up. And my thought is, okay, well, maybe it's consistent in the ceiling. Maybe you can get it relatively consistent back here in the shadowy areas. But what do you do about this stuff? The light that's spilling in through the window and the objects that it's hitting. How do you manage that when you're working day after day after day?
You can make it up.
Oh, are you serious?
Actually, yeah, because I mean, look, the light, nothing in that painting, there's no single situation that painting represents. And there's no single light source, no, not source, but there's no single light moment that painting represents. There is a certain kind of logic that to the way light, just the way you would think about, don't you think about when light hits a head, you have a kind of concept of how things, what I would call it like a mental model of what you're expecting, right?
Right.
And then what you do, I think we're doing when we look at something is we're pushing that model up against observation. And so, like sunlight, it hits something, it's going to obey certain angles relative to what's blocking it. And, you find that when the sunlight gets closer to a wall, that it has a lot more reflected light up in the wall there, And so you just these things happening, and you can kind of cut and paste them, and you can kind of imagine them. And the painting is a hodgepodge of a million different sort of moments like that. So it's really surprising, at least my understanding of it, it's actually not very complicated.
Which also makes it more authentic because you haven't just captured one moment, you've captured basically infinite moments.
Right. And that to me works much more naturally. And I think I found myself fighting with this idea that what I was trying to get was this moment. There was a moment, and I was going to get that. But I realize I just don't experience my life as moments. Like I just don't. I mean, the experience is much more cumulative. And I liken this to, if I asked you, say, what your kid looks like, right? You would recognize your kid. And if something was a millimeter off on your kid, you'd be like, what is wrong with that? Like, that's not right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But you couldn't tell me like what view it is that you would recognize them from. Like, you don't have a single view of them that you could say, yeah, I know exactly what they look like in this. It's your mental picture of that likeness is not limited to any moment. It's a cumulative thing, right?
Well, not only that, but that's another great analogy. You're really good at analogies, by the way. But not only that, but if I were trying to imagine my kid and draw them from imagination, not only is it not limited to a single position, but I don't think I could actually totally visualize a single position.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's strange.
And so, yeah, it's very weird. And so I just found myself trying to paint in a way that just didn't require as much of a fight, where I didn't feel like I was just kind of fighting with all these things that were, that like changing light and changing, this, that, and the other thing. And just trying to do something that felt natural and felt not easy, but just didn't feel like the kind of struggle. I mean, it's a struggle only in the sense that it's exhausting, but I don't like the feeling of that I'm like fighting with it.
Yeah.
You know?
I've been doing Jeff's online mentorship program for about a year now, and it is awesome. Everything is online, super streamlined. If you can be there, I mean, you have the ability to talk to him once a week and he can review your work and help you. If you can't be there, it's pre-recorded. You can go back and even re-watch things if you missed something during class or couldn't be there. So the online portion of it is almost better than real life because you can always go back to it, which is awesome. The demos are recorded. It's just like all available whenever you need it. And I'm a stay-at-home mom of 4 and my time is limited and it's also very interrupted. And so to be able to go back has been clutch for me. And you get to work with Jeff HEIN, who's awesome. He's tough. The assignments are simple, but difficult, and they're difficult to make us all better. And he's able to give us these assignments, coach us through it, help us stay excited to progress. And so it's just been a great experience. I am so grateful that he has been willing to take time away from his own art to offer all of us to have it. So if you're thinking about doing it, it's amazing.
If you're interested in learning more about how you could study with me, either online or in person, check out HEINatelier.com. That's HEINatelier.com. Yeah. You know, one thing I learned that's related to this is, well, I learned it from film, from people who do lighting for films. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos and stuff on it because as you may know, I do multi-figure painting, and what I do is I build little maquettes, and then I put little figures in the maquettes, and then I light it, and so on and so forth. But oftentimes, if you light it the way you think natural light actually would exist. So let's say in the case of the one I'm doing right now, I want this stream of light coming through a hole in the ceiling and illuminating the figures within. If I just have a single light source like the sun, it's not that interesting. So I've got 7 lights on this particular maquette in order to make it look like a sunny day in this old Jewish house. There's 7 lights to represent one light. And it looks freaking cool. It looks so much more real than when I have one light.
That's what's so funny, because like it's this exact same thing. Like if you have one light, you are like following the literal logic of sun, right? But somehow the literal logic is not up to the task.
No,
you know?
I know. That's exactly what it was. I'm like, this isn't working. This looks terrible. But now it looks like if you looked at it, I'd show you, but I can't because I haven't painted it yet. But if you looked at it, you'd be like, whoa, that looks exactly like a sunny day coming through the windows. But it's not. It's 7 different lights.
So is it the small scale environment that you make?
Yeah, it's 1/12 scale or 1/6 scale. Okay. Yeah.
So do you make a little, like you make maquettes of the figure, and do you make like a model of the space, like a shadow box?
Here, let me show you. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, I got it.
So I don't have a way to show you the actual maquette with my camera set up here, but I will show you one of the figures. It's just these little figures that I bought ages ago. See?
Yeah.
So, and I just made little costumes for him. Yeah, I make the clothes for him.
That's great.
This is what I do. Anyway, and then I build the whole house and put them in the house. And the house, I build it, I kind of go over the top and make it look as real as possible. And then I paint from that. And it's fun. It's almost as fun as the painting.
Well, I was going to say, let me ask you this. You were saying that sometimes it's hard to get yourself to paint. Is it ever hard to get yourself to make the maquettes? Because I bet that's pretty fun.
No, but I think the reason why is because I do it so much less than painting. So it really does come down to boredom. Anything that I do more than 25 hours a week, I get bored. But with maquettes, it's once every 6 months, once a year, I make a maquette. So I'm like super excited.
Okay.
But by the time I'm done, I'm done. I'm like, I don't want to do another maquette.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, short attention span. That's the curse I deal
Oh,
with.
amen. Amen. I got that too.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Okay, so another question I have about your paintings. You had, I don't know if you actually said you don't do perspective drawings or not. I can't remember, but I noticed that you have all this line work, these ruled lines throughout. And then in your drawings, I noticed something interesting. Let me see. I'll pull one of these up where I saw it. You had numbers right here. Or you had little tick marks, not numbers, but tick marks.
Yeah.
There was one where I saw numbers. So tell me a little bit about this process. What is it you're doing to get that space?
So the drawings are from a few years ago when I first started to really try to do these like really big spaces, and I felt there was so much that was changing by such a huge amount. It was so hard to deal with all this space that I had to just hash it out in graphite for a long time. And then I was actually transferring those drawings and then painting. But and then I would let it change if I wanted to during the painting process. But it was just so, when you're doing that, and when the view is so far outside of your, when you have to turn your body, for example, significantly to capture part of it, you're moving like you're moving things by inches. I mean, I'm not talking like centimeters. Like, I'd be moving huge things, like really big distances, to try to get them to fit into the painting. And so I had to do that for a while. And now I stopped doing it because I just started to enjoy kind of just jumping right into it and hashing it out in paint.
Okay.
So I'm not really doing.
So, but what do these little numbers and what did those tick marks represent? Was that part of the perspective drawing process?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or sometimes I like if I run into a pattern or like bricks or something like that, I have this kind of perverse interest in counting them out.
Oh, okay.
But it's not to be accurate. It's just that there's something very mesmerizing about that process to me. And I also like it as a graphic idea. I'm just attracted to this idea of like kind of imprinting something that's so flagrantly unillusionistic, into the fabric of the surface somehow. So I really, it's just a kind of, I don't know, it's a habit.
Okay, so on the paintings, again, I still see them, lines here and there. It's a vanishing point. I don't know, like a diagonal here in graphite. Is this you trying to map it out as well?
Yeah, I have to draw like mad. In fact, I think most of my time is spent doing something that I would refer to as drawing. It's not that it's done with a pencil necessarily, but it's trying to, find out where I want things to be and what their sort of two-dimensional and three-dimensional relationships are on the canvas. And there's a kind of reciprocal process between what I would call like drawing and painting, where there's I feel the impetus to make a mark, right, to locate something in space or on the canvas. And then as soon as that mark is made, it starts to, like, a shape kind of gets generated out of that in its relationship to other marks. And as soon as I start to feel a shape, I have this impulse to register that shape with color. And so there's a back, and then and sometimes I'll see a color relationship and it's striking, and I'll have the impulse to register that. And so I'll slop a color on there. And then as soon as I do that, that color starts to ask to be a shape. And then, so it's like the drawing leads to the color, leads to the drawing, leads to the color. It's just always going like that. So that the marks are just my totally honest attempt to find locations for things based on all kinds of different criteria, perspective, optical measurement, shape design, I try not to let any one of those categories have a tyrannical hold on the painting.
Yeah.
Like I'll put it, it's totally possible that like there's an alignment. It happens all the time to me that there's a kind of tangency or an alignment in the space that is totally unhelpful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's measurably accurate. Or there's an angle in the perspective, if I stick with one particular perspective approach that, seems like weirdly abrupt, even though it's quote unquote accurate. Like I have no problem making that into what works, because those relationships on the canvas to me are as real as the relationships out there in the world. And so it's not even like, I just let all of those criteria work their way into the decision-making process, basically.
Okay, so that goes back to my question earlier about handling composition and also honoring the space. So you are moving things on occasion in order to serve the design.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's all a game because first of all, I've never stood anywhere, closed one eye, and kept my head in the same place for like 2 seconds in my life.
Right.
So that's very weirdly unnatural, I think. And so, I'm sitting there and I'm experiencing a thing, and like sometimes I'm looking over there and the thing overlaps a certain way, and sometimes I'm looking over there and it's different. So, I want it to, so all of that is fair game as far as I'm concerned,
So this could even be 3 different perspectives forced into one perspective.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's wild.
But none of it is, I don't think any of it is, none of it is artificial in the sense that it all seems, they're all experiences of the space that I can have and that I do have.
Right.
It's just that there are so many different like ways that you can experience angles, even depending on how you orient your body.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you may need, you talked about how you have this urge to separate the different bricks or tiles or whatever, but you may need a shrink, I'm afraid, because you totally notched out for all these tiles and then you didn't paint the tiles.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually worked on painting again.
You did?
And I did paint.
Oh, you did?
But that's, but that's so much, you talked about ADD. I mean, man, I'll get excited about something and then I'll lose interest in like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Wander off the path. So all of that, I've just decided to let all of that show. And I mean, metaphorically and literally, I try to have that kind of frank approach about the way I make the things, and hopefully about the way I am. Because it's a much more comfortable way to live. It's a much more comfortable way to paint, to not feel like I'm trying to appear a certain way. Like I'm not cleaning up my house for you, basically, is what I'm saying. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Seems really liberating.
It is, but it can be its own form of self-consciousness too, though. You can start to want to look like somebody who doesn't care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm prone to that too, to being like, I'm orchestrating this thing where you think I'm not orchestrating anything.
Right.
It's really weird. I don't know.
It's great. And this is sort of maybe sort of a weird compliment, but it's great how in touch you are with your own response to your paintings and yourself. Like you seem very aware of all of the emotions that are going on in your head about your work, which I think is cool. I mean, I think it serves your work and it does add authenticity to it.
I guess I got to the point where it just wasn't a choice. I mean, both like on a personally and from a painting point of view, life was just too hard if I trying to be something that I really wasn't, you know. I guess I couldn't open myself up to that possibility of failure, that I could want to be something and then that I might not be able to do that. So I kind of went for the feeling that, well, if there's no other virtue, at least I'll be honest about it, you know, like, and then it's liberating, because you don't, if you can accept, and this is the hardest thing, I think, is if you can accept that people might not understand you, which is a terrifying thing, I think, like personally, that then you can be liberated, you know. But it's very, very hard to really have, you know, to say, like, I'm okay with this. Like, I'm okay with what I like. I'm okay with what I make. You know, it's because we want to be accepted. You know, like I desperately want people to like what I do. But the more I do that, the less in touch I am with what I like.
Okay, that brings up some thoughts, though. I mean, because maybe you're not like this, but do you know what you like? In other words, a lot of artists I've talked to, and I'm definitely one of them, are really hard on their work, and they don't necessarily it's like, let me put it from my own perspective. So I keep going back to the same brushwork. It's like it's like the way I walk, it's the way I move, it's my mannerisms. And I keep going back to it, even though I'm perfectly capable of mimicking other artists. So I know that's pretty authentic, and I'm trying not, and I don't fight it. I just let it be. But I don't necessarily like what it is. You know, I'd rather look like Joe Schmo or Peter, or, you know what I mean? I'd rather look at like those artists than what I do. But in the name of authenticity, I stick with what comes out naturally. I mean, do you ever deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's all I'm doing. I mean, it's very, very hard, because I think eventually I think if you work long enough at this stuff, certain things just won't go away. You know, they just won't. And you got to stop fighting them. And they, you can't, there's some things that you just, whatever that you may want to change about yourself that you may never change. And I think we all have that to some degree. I think, you know, I think I might actually have a worse case of sort of my like set point for self-esteem may be lower than most people, but so I'm constantly like feeling like, no, I don't want to be like this, I want to be like that, you know.
Right.
But no, I know, it's like the worst thing, like everything you make, you feel like, God, it looks like I made it. Like,
I know. It's like looking at your own face, you know, you're never going to appreciate it.
Well, that's why I say self-portraiture is the meanest thing you can do, because
seriously,
you have to accept that not only can you not paint well, but you look weird as well at the same time. It's like, it's too much.
That's hilarious. Yeah, it's so true. Oh man, especially when you're like me and you do self-portraits really rarely. And the last one I did one maybe 15 years ago, and then I did one again about a year ago, and I'm like, holy piss, my face aged.
It's like, I won't even look at
I'm like, where's all this fat coming from? Yeah, it's I don't know, man. Yeah, anyway. All right. Okay, so let's look at a couple more of your paintings, and maybe if there's anything you'd like to talk about. Okay, I have a question. So you're not setting up the space. Well, before I ask this question, I actually want to go to your other work, to this awesome page called Ancient, which I find really hilarious. And this is the stuff that's clearly influenced by your training, where you're like, I want to paint, or not necessarily I want to, but I was taught to paint classical beauty, seek after classical beauty, find the quote unquote beautiful scenes. And as I looked at this, I thought, holy crap, has he shifted big time.
Yeah.
And this is totally Florence Academy student type stuff. But then I want to go to your next page, Archive. And in this one, you start to see your evolution where you're not quite doing bold things with edges yet, but you're starting to, at least not as bold, but you're starting to think about texture. You're starting to think about ordinary spaces, and then back to your regular work or your current work. And it's like, okay, now you're thinking about edges. You're thinking about, you already moved to your own spaces, but now you're thinking about breaking edges and interesting textures. And maybe even now correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect you're experimenting with more extreme perspectives, moving things around more. Okay, so that brings me, correct me if any of those things are wrong. Is my analysis accurate? Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and then I get to that one. Oops, I just passed it. And I think, okay, but are you ever staging like you might have at Florence Academy at all? Or do you actually have a skeleton right next to your motorcycle?
I have a skeleton that occasionally finds itself next to my motorcycle, yes.
Oh, that's a trip. Okay, and it's not a joke question. I mean, it sounds like a long explanation, a long analysis for a stupid question, but it's not to me. What I want to know is there ever a point where it's okay to stage a scene, or is it always about just finding the scene and being true to the space that you live in?
It's always okay to stage it, I think, because I should say, though, I will put stuff, like if you go to the corner of that table that's very close to you there, like right at the sharp. Yeah, so like that at the very near corner of that had been giving me trouble, like over to the right a little bit there.
Yeah.
So that was just formally really, really a problem for me. And this painting doesn't look like this anymore. Because I took an object and put it there because I had to do something about that corner. So I'll do that all the time. Like I'll push stuff around to try to get something to solve a formal problem all the time. And the skeleton, I'm sure I moved that skeleton so that it met the window at the right place so that the head wasn't, I'm doing that all the time. The question to me, the trick about setting up to me is, do you, as the painter, believe it? You know what I'm saying?
Wait a minute, what do you mean? Do you believe the space is truthful or the painting is truthful?
Do you believe what yourself when you're putting it up there? Or do you feel like you're faking it?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like I never eat Arby's, so this is a stupid example, but I never eat Arby's, so I wouldn't put an Arby's bag there because it's not true to my environment.
Sure. Yeah, right. And some people, for example, have a very strong, most people probably have a very rich narrative, life about, myth and whatever, like, or religion and this is a real, they feel this the same way I feel space, right?
Right.
And so they go to set up a composition. This is they believe this, and that's what comes across in the work. What comes across in the work is not whether or not it's true; it's whether or not you believe it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's you're getting. So what everybody believes is different. And so if I were to set up a still life like let's say my teacher was a figure painter, still is, and I wanted desperately to be like him, okay? And in a lot of ways I still do. And he was painting figures, right? And so I naturally, I think, sort of took on his ambitions as my own. I thought, oh, I want to paint figures too. I would go and I would try to set up basically what were really his paintings. And then after a while, I couldn't believe myself anymore. And that's not because painting figures, set up figures is not real. It's not real for me, And so his paintings of set up figures I really like. I don't like my paintings of set up figures because that's not really who I am. And so when I'm setting things up, I really believe it. Like when I take an object and I throw it somewhere, I have such strong feelings about that I should do that I believe it. And that's the manipulation just has to do with, I think, what you really what you really believe is the right thing to do, I guess. So
Okay.
I'm moving stuff all the time.
I gotcha. So just to make sure I understand, so it would be against your own personal rules to take down these power tools and put up a bunch of antique hand planes and draw knives and whatnot, because it's not part of your personal narrative.
I don't think I could I don't think I could find the interest in that. I don't have a genuine interest in that. I have a genuine interest in taking the kind of formal analysis that I learned in Florence and bringing it to bear on, an orbital sander. That's what's interesting to me.
Right, right. Okay.
That's so interesting to me.
But is it interesting to you because it's part of your life, or is it interesting to you because it's contemporary?
Well, it's interesting to me because it's a little incongruous at first, but it's interesting to me because what it does is it shows how language and sort of visual poetry is not really attached to like the literal thing, that you can, that just as light moves across a beautiful hand plane, so does light move across a Bosch
router,
orbital sander.
Yeah, orbital sander.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting to me. It's like if you move into these painting and sort of aesthetic categories of shape and volume and space and gesture and light, then what it means for something to become a subject changes. Like, because everything has those qualities, and that's what makes, for me, that's what makes it possible for everything in the world to be meaningful. Because then it's up to you to bestow meaning on it through your efforts. And that's where the commitment is very philosophical, because I really don't want to live in a world where there are beautiful things and not beautiful things, where there's some kind of like, either you lucked out or you didn't. Like, that's not, I don't think I could live like that. And I want to live in a world where what's really worthwhile is somehow accessible to us. It's all I can deal with emotionally.
Okay, this stuff all makes sense, totally. But I'm still not sure I understand your motives, though. Is it, so are you choosing the orbital sander over the antique hand plane because it provides a challenge of creating beauty with the way light falls over it, because beauty is in everything? Basically what you had just elaborated on. Yeah. Or is it the personal challenge of making something that we all perceive as ordinary, like the Bosch sander? Or is it because you have a connection with those objects that is more authentic to you? That's where I'm confused. It's all of that. So it's the personal challenge and the connection.
And the aesthetic, yeah, it's exactly all those things. Because now, if I did have if there were a nice antique hand plane there, and that was mine, I had it, I'd paint it.
Okay,
I wouldn't say,
that answers my question. But it wouldn't be authentic if you went out and bought one to put in your painting, because that's not your purpose. Your purpose is to capture your personal narrative through your living spaces and environment.
Right, that's right.
Okay, that makes sense. Man, I love that. Absolutely love that concept. And it's, what I love about it too is you also live near Carlo Russo. I don't know, do you know Carlo? I do. Yeah. You guys couldn't have different philosophies. You couldn't be more different, and yet I love both of your work. So it's just awesome how art is just so diverse and beautiful across all these different planes and ideas.
Yeah, Carlo, it's so interesting that you mentioned Carlo, because Carlo was one of the first people that I came in contact with when I first came back to Philly. He and I had studios right next to each other.
Oh, no way.
And you couldn't find somebody who has a more different approach to that than I do. But yet I think his work is incredibly moving. Yeah. And I love it.
It's extraordinary.
And it's just astonishing. And I would love to have one of those paintings in my house, because what I get from that is what he really feels strongly about,
right?
You know? And that's off the painting.
Yeah, it's like you said about your teacher. You'd probably love to have one of his figure paintings too, but you're not comfortable painting paintings like that. It's just not you.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I can imagine. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about Carlo and I'm like, he's probably got he's probably got rooms full of antique stuff and all the stuff he's collected at flea market. No, not probably. He said he did. Flea markets and everything else. And you're just like, well, I'm taking a dump right now and this environment is pretty interesting. Maybe I'll just paint it.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, could you guys be more different?
No, it's really funny. I don't know if you know a guy. There's a guy who I went to school with named Toby Wright, who's one of my favorite people in the world. And he does these like epic, he goes to the Arctic to paint and he goes all over the place. He's one of my best friends. And he and I joke about how like the lengths he goes to find something to paint. And I barely get out of bed to find. I'm like, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
It is pretty comical if you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's also magic because this is incredible. It's just so ordinary and so incredible. I have an old house too, and I see these kind of windows every day.
Yeah.
And I've never thought to paint them. Another artist that you probably like is Zoe Frank. She has a similar,
Zoe. Yeah.
Hers is obviously different, but she does a lot of ordinary too, like her Radiator series and stuff, which was really incredible.
Yeah, Zoe's a force of nature. I mean, she's on a whole different plane. But it is, it has to do, I think, with the feeling that, that you're not trying to get somewhere else, that, and that's the feeling that I mean, I guess I always had felt like the party is somewhere else, wherever I mean, metaphorically and literally. And then I need to change where I am or change how I am, anything like that, to be, truly in the world and having a good experience. And that just got too hard to live with.
Yeah.
It was never, I could never satisfy the need. There was no place or thing that I could have or buy or anything like that would felt like, yeah, that was enough. And so I just thought, look, if I can't be me, for me, if I can't be happy with this, I can't be happy with anything, and that's my nature, and so that's how I ended up doing things that it's funny. It's very hard for me to realize how ridiculous it looks to other people. I can intellectually, I can imagine that, but I can't feel that. And to me, this looks totally understandable.
Wait, what do you mean? I'm not following. What do you think looks ridiculous to other people?
What I do.
Okay. I guess I didn't understand because it doesn't look ridiculous to me. So I thought you must be referring to something else. So you think it's possible that there's a large portion of the population that looks at what you do as ridiculous?
Yes, but I'm fine with that. I think, I wonder. What's interesting to me, but it's interesting because I think that there are people that understand what I like and what I do, but they don't hew to any particular demographic. I think it's a temperamental thing that just is not about class or any of the other kind of what I feel to be fairly silly identity categories that everybody's obsessed with. It doesn't travel along those lines. It's a different kind of frequency where like I'll have whatever, somebody just on the street, like who I don't know, they're not artists or into art at all, but they get it. You can tell they get it.
Yeah.
And then you'll have people who are really interested in art and they don't get it at all, and that's fine. So
yeah,
it's a temperamental thing.
Yeah, I guess I could see that. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm going to use my mom as an example, but I can imagine her looking at this painting and going, well, it would have been prettier if it was a pretty neighborhood, or something like that. Yeah. Those stereotypical things that a large portion of the population might find interesting, or might expect an artist to paint. And instead of
Yeah.
the edge, instead of a window frame in an ordinary house.
Yeah, I get that. I totally understand that. And I think most people probably feel that way. It's a funny place to be, though, because you don't really fit into anything. It's not cool, really, but it's not attractive either. So you kind of exist in a no man's land, in terms of people who like it. It's not. It's paintings. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I do know what you're saying based on the general population, maybe. I don't know. I can't speak for the general population, but I will say that I don't see it that way. I think it's cool and beautiful. But I get what you're saying.
Painter.
I'm a painter. Yeah, I get what you're saying. But I'm sure you have collectors that also agree with that. I mean, you're selling some of these paintings at least.
Sometimes most of them I give away.
You give them away? Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's amazingly generous.
It's not really, because what I really want is for them to be in somebody else's consciousness. That's
gosh.
And that to me is, if I'll do anything to make that happen. And so, yeah. In fact, I've given away probably my best paintings. I think the ones that I'm most fond of. In fact, I gave a painting recently to my brother, and it's like a big painting. I think it's one of my better paintings, and it's ambitious and all that. There's literally nothing that would make me prouder than to know that my brother likes that painting and that it's in his life. Like this, if somebody from, whatever gallery came to me and said, "This is great, we want to have a solo show based on this painting," it wouldn't mean half what it means to me that, my older brother, who, of course, you always want to be like your older brother, thinks that this is great. This is so much more important to me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Man, I wish I was related to you.
It may be, if you go back far enough.
Maybe let's get on Ancestry, that app, and find out, because maybe you'll send me a painting if we're close enough cousins.
Hey, listen, careful.
Okay, let's pan through a few more of these paintings, just so the audience can see them. Oh gosh, again, just want to point out how wild the curves are on this. And
yeah, that's where I am right now, actually. It's like right out.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like sitting.
That's,
you can kind of see out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so the house is really cool like that. It has windows on three sides at least, so that's good.
Yeah. What year was your house built?
Early 1900s.
Okay.
It's
a pretty old house.
The freestanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. So, okay, you said you have a studio. Why? You're never painting inside your studio, it appears.
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I should say I work a lot on the paintings away from the subject.
Oh, I'm glad I asked that question. Really? What happens when you're not in front of the subject? What kind of work are you doing?
All kinds of stuff. First of all, I almost exclusively work on it upside down when it's away from the subject. And basically, I'm solidifying and I would say kind of registering what I thought I had registered when I was there. Like when I'm painting in the moment, I'm very absorbed in looking at the thing and being in the place and all that stuff. And I actually, maybe I don't actually do that much when I'm in there, but I'll come back to the studio and I'll remember, oh boy, I really liked the way that blue might push off of that orange or whatever. And then I'll see that I just didn't make it happen like I thought I did. It just didn't happen when I was there. And so I'll try to make it happen the way I imagined it happening in the studio. And when the painting is upside down, I get freed from all of the all of the kind of commitments that are kind of blocking me up a little bit. So I'll get, when I'm working on a thing from life, I get really married to like where certain things are, or certain contrasts, or certain moments that I think are working well. And then when I
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary Brushes. But for the rest of you, come on, take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting.
Yeah. So I'll, like, for example, I'm painting a painting of my dining room now, and there's nothing on the table, but I want stuff to be on the table. So I tried to make some stuff up the other day in the studio, and I can't wait to see what it actually looks like. Like, I imagined what color the shadow might be, or how big the plate might be relative to the table. And I can't wait to be surprised by what it actually is like.
Oh man, your way of painting sounds like a blast.
Oh, it's so much fun. You got to try it.
I might try. I'm sure my paintings would look like my brushstrokes, but just the process sounds like so much fun. The other, and when you, so let's say it was you wouldn't do a basket of fruit, you'd put a sander on your table, but.
Well, if I had if there was a basket of fruit there, I might do it.
I know, I'm teasing. I'm just teasing, but. So let's say it is a basket of fruit that you made up. You go, you put the basket of fruit on, you get the shadows wrong. My suspicion is, based on what I've seen of your paintings, is you might not completely cover up your guesswork.
Oh, no, I would.
Yeah. And that's what makes it interesting. You're going to get all these cool layers of what you're imagining versus what's really there, which adds all this interesting history.
Yeah, that's actually, if I try to like tidy up and clean up, the painting loses, because that vitality that I experience when that moment of surprise happens, that feeling of vitality is registered the second I put that color down that I see relative to the color that I made up.
Right.
So the subject in that sense is that moment of surprise of my expectation against my observation. So to take the old part out would actually be to take the subject out of the painting, because you would take out the actual moment of discovery. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that's why, very natural. I'm not trying to like leave things out. I'm trying to actually just paint what it is that comes up and no more.
Dude, I love how poetic that sounds. So you leave the old, you leave the imagined, so that the actual observation that you record has something to be compared against, which gives it even more authenticity.
Right. Because I would actually argue that that's what observation is right. In just like that, and I think this is scientifically true. I don't know, but that your mind, that you interact with the world by what they call like a generative model, which is like you've created a very complex and increasingly complex prediction about what you're going to see and experience in the world. And then your senses are running tests against that all the time. And so that's what, like, so a baby has no experience. It has not developed any kind of generative model of the world, which is why it can't make sense out of its environment. And like, when a baby wants to learn, if a baby's going to learn the fact that a closer object appears bigger, and a further object appears further away, it has to do that by actually moving the object with its own hand. So that because then it can attach physical distance to an optical effect, and it starts to make a model out of like its experiences. That thing's further away. Okay, I can expect this, I can expect that. So your brain's making these like incredibly complex models against which it tests its experience, because if you just encountered the world on raw data, you'd be completely helpless.
You'd be walking off of cliffs, falling downstairs.
Right. You wouldn't know anything. You wouldn't know which way was up. And I think, I think they've given people sight who have never seen before, and they just are blown away. Like they don't know what they're looking at. They can't make any sense out of it because they have no model for that. So my point is that the excitement of observation is not exciting without an expectation. And so you cannot have you cannot have surprise if you don't have an expectation. And so that's where, for me, the vitality is of anything.
Are you sure you have a low IQ? This stuff is great.
Well, I think I have the lowest. Let me just say, I think it was implied that I have the lowest one out of my brothers, but maybe they're just super smart.
Oh, maybe they're geniuses, man. Okay,
well,
so
I would contest.
I'm glad you clarified that. The reason I say that is because, you know, one of my pet peeves of being an artist is being compared to a certain type of artist. You know, it's when I meet someone that I've never met before and they say, and I tell them I'm an artist, the first thing they ask me is, well, what does your wife do? Because they assume that I'm not making a living at all making any money, right? The second thing, I know they're either thinking or they'll maybe ask in some form of question is, you know, something that suggests that I've got these crazy harebrained ideas about the world and I'm a totally loopy, crazy free thinker and not terribly analytical, right? And I don't know, maybe that's my own experience. Maybe that stereotype doesn't exist in your world, but
no, it does.
Yeah. But and I've experienced it where I meet a certain class of artists that typically, it's not my audience, not realists, but where everything is just sort of frou-frou. It's like all the art is about magic, art is about feelings, art is about soul, and there's not a lot of substance behind anything that's being said. What I like when you're talking, what you're talking about, is I'm hearing this very poetic approach to art, which is what this class of artists is after: poetry and beauty and substance. I'm hearing that from you with an analytical, almost scientific framework. That really appeals to me because it's real. It's like poetic, but it's real. It's not just a bunch of gobbledygook. It's got substance. It's got something tangible to back it up.
Well, I think it's I don't think it's a requirement, but it's just my nature to wonder about those things, and I do think it's very easy to hide behind emotive language and but I think it's a wonderful challenge to try as best as possible to like sort of pin down what it is that about what you like that and how this weird mystery works, you know?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And I mean, I just can't help myself from thinking about it. And I think what can happen is, and this is maybe I'm a little defensive about this, is that people will say, oh, you're very analytical. Like, and that like you have these, you reason out what you're going to do.
That's
and then
not how I see it.
No, but so it's, so to me, it's the other way around. Like it's kind of reverse engineering from the painting. Like you do what you do, and then you're introspective about it, and you go, when I think about it. So I was accused of being an intellectual once, which to me is like, no. I was like,
it's funny that's offensive.
Ever since then, I've been fighting against that. Because I guess it does make me feel like, I'm not really in touch with, the real emotional substance of art, which may be true. I don't know.
Well, it sounds to me like this side of your craftsmanship personality, the person who makes things, right? That side of you that makes, the creative side, you treat it the same way you treat your emotional side, because early on in a conversation, you were analyzing all the reasons why you teach, saying, I teach because I need to be around people. I teach because I need attention. I teach, I'm obviously oversimplifying it. And I was really impressed with that. You're really in touch with that and you're being completely honest with yourself, and you're doing the same things with how you make things. You're saying, yeah, I made that thing. I responded to it. Why did I respond to it that way? What is happening? How am I thinking, and why is it working? And that's when the intellectual, analytical side starts to come in and sort of fill in all the gaps as to how things are made.
it's funny you point that out, because I didn't, like I said, I did not go to college, and I don't have much formal education beyond. I went into a very good high school.
Yeah.
But I didn't do very well there. But I had an experience when I was about 20, maybe, where my mom insisted that I go to cognitive behavioral therapy. This was like way back in the day before people knew much about it, but because I was just difficult and just unreasonably unhappy, and that teaches a way of sort of, I don't know, thinking about your thinking such that you can, if you're so captured by the emotions that you're having that you can't function, that this is a way of sort of literally putting yourself at a distance from those things, and sort of making it so that those feelings don't completely derange your experience of the world, which is what it was doing for me. You know, like I would get feedback that I didn't like about something that I had done. It was just, I couldn't function for days. Like, you know, some little thing that somebody might have implied. And I could see from the way other people acted around me that this was not really normal. This was not a good way to behave. But I was completely in the grips of it. I couldn't be talked out of it, you know? So that was like a really important educational experience for me. I think that's why I ended up thinking so much about thinking, you know?
So do you think that cognitive behavioral therapy, is that what you called it? What it's called?
Yeah.
Do you think that those skills that you learned to be able to analyze your own thoughts have helped you to learn how to analyze your own behavior as a painter or maker?
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. I mean, 100. Yep. Absolutely.
Interesting. Yep. I never would have made that connection. Okay. One thing I want to comment on, I hate to get off that topic because that's a really interesting topic, but as I've been staring at this painting, I just have to comment. I love color. I have a palette of like 30 of the most chromatic colors I can find. If I go to the store and I find a more chromatic color, I'll throw out the one I was using and put that on my palette. So I just love some of these blues and greens that you've got here in this painting. And then some of the blues and the shadow, they're so beautiful. And,
thank you.
You can't just squeeze it out. People might argue, well, it just came out of the tube that way. But no, it's not that they're beautiful alone, it's they're beautiful in the company of the other colors you choose. The way you're organizing these colors is just really gorgeous.
Well, thank you. It's not something, I mean, as you know, color is just relationships.
Right.
I really admire people who are able to handle a broader range of chroma than I am. You know, I live in a very, very narrow range of chroma. I never learned to deal with like these big moves in chroma. And part of that is an effort to do what I would call like paint a particular like color of the light, you know, like so that whole painting has a certain cast to it. And so, you know, each of the paintings is it in itself a particular color. So the red in that painting, it's really not very red. It's actually, if you put it on your palette, it wouldn't look red at all. You know, it looks red in that context, but you know, so that I actually have a very, very, I mean, all the colors in my paintings are just like raw umber, or no, burnt, it's like burnt sienna, raw sienna, like blue, black, and then obviously white, and then I have a kind of juiced up version of each of those colors. It's not.
Wait, you don't have a blue? These blues are just coming from
no, no, I have like ultramarine. So I have.
I didn't hear you say that.
A real subdued color triangle where the so it's like raw sienna, burnt sienna, and blue black, and I kind of like those colors create the bulk, like the body of the mixture, you know, and then kind of like the mixture just kind of gets seasoned by, you know, I have a fake cadmium, whatever, but like by these higher chroma things. So it's really kind of a really simple.
What are these colors? I normally don't ask this question, but now I'm really curious. So what are some examples of a higher chroma red, yellow, and blue that you use?
So I tend to have a higher chroma on each side of the spectrum. So if it's a red, I'll have a colder red and then a hotter red.
Yeah.
Okay. So like if I go down the palette, there's a raw sienna, and then to the right of that is I use fake cadmium. I mean,
because you're worried about the cadmium poison of the cadmium.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I am is because I paint in the house and I sand my paintings and I have a kid.
Oh, well, I use vermilion. I don't even have cadmium on my palette.
Yeah.
Well, I do in yellow. I do in yellow. I take that back.
But I found that my fears about toxicity were beginning to put some constraints on the way I felt when I was painting, and I just thought I wasn't more. So I have the fake cadmium yellow. That's nice and juicy. And then I start to go to the left, and there's like the burnt sienna. And then I have a fake cad red, and then I have an alizarin crimson. So there's like this hot, pumped up red, and then a colder red,
Yeah.
And then as I go to like the orange, I have like a cadmium orange, and then I have a couple blue, like an ultramarine blue, and then a kind of fake cerulean blue. So these are ways like a green blue and a red blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some tube greens that I like a permanent green, and then some certain like what I would call flavors that I think I can't get without some specialty colors like
phthalo?
Like alizarin. Yeah. So I use phthalo green because there's a certain minty quality to a phthalo that
you can't mix it. It's impossible.
Phthalo is like cilantro to me. Like it's just a very unique flavor, and you can't get that flavor some other way. Same with alizarin. Like you can't push something in that very specific spot that alizarin can get it.
Have you thought much about that? Because you're obviously a thinker. Have you thought much about why can't you mix phthalos? If everything in the spectrum is red, blue, and yellow, it seems like you should be able to mix it. It's so frustrating. Yeah, it's weird.
No idea.
Huh?
Yeah, that's the long and short, basically.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, those are that makes a lot of sense. Those colors. So, with your alizarin crimson, have you ever tried? Because I used to use alizarin crimson. And obviously, what you're doing is great. So I'm not suggesting you make any changes whatsoever. But I used to use alizarin, and for some reason, for me personally, it felt too potent. And then I switched to chromacridone magenta, and it's...
Oh, I tried that. What is it called?
Chromacridone magenta.
Okay.
And I find that it's not quite as harsh as alizarin. Alizarin is so cold. It's almost like icy cold red. Anyway, I love magenta.
Is it transparent?
It's very transparent.
I'll have to try it.
Yeah, very transparent. And I'll mix it with a phthalo green to get black. Oh, no, that's not true. That's not true. I mix perylin with phthalo green to get black, and it's a really rich black. Perylin's more like I describe it as like blood red. It's just a really deep, transparent red. Yeah. But anyway, oh yeah. Well, man, this has been fun. And so my final question is, I'm going to phrase it a little bit different for you, because you said obviously you're giving away paintings. You don't have to paint. Your career is mostly teaching as far as paying the bills, if not entirely. So I want to ask you.
Well, I should be clear about that. I have family wealth that helps me as well. I don't want anybody to believe.
That's awesome.
It's very, very important to me that people don't get a false picture of what things are like.
Right. Yeah. It's great, your authenticity. I really appreciate that.
Well, I just think it's only fair. I mean, and so, no, but basically
you're fine. You're fine. You do whatever you want. Good for you, man. Yeah. That's a blessing. Seriously. And you know what? I'm grateful that people like you have that. I was in DC once with a senator. I had a portrait of a senator to do. And I think I've told this story in the podcast, so my audience will have to forgive me, but I've never forgotten it. But in this day and age where a lot of people are really down on the disparity between wealth and poverty and everything, I always think about this story. And I'm not even stating my opinions on that. That's not relevant. But we're walking around, and we're walking through DC from the Capitol Rotunda. He takes me through these tunnels to these other buildings. It's pretty trippy in DC when you're with a senator. They have all these secret tunnels and whatnot. I'm just in awe, just blown away by all the incredible architecture there. Everything down to the tile work on all the floors is just incredible. And I'm sure you've been to DC. You're not that far away, but I'm just in awe of it. And I asked him, I'm like, man, it sucks that we just don't have architecture like this anymore. He goes, well, that's because of the distribution of wealth. That's the one downside of democracy. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, because there's just not enough of a disparity between the rich and the poor in order to have these kinds of buildings to be made anymore. You know, if you think about the Sistine Chapel, it was made by a really wealthy pope, you know, right? And so, not stating my opinion, but I'm grateful for people who have the resources to be able to make whatever they want and not be inhibited by the fear to turn on the lights. Because frankly, I don't know that you could have made this if you weren't in the situation you're in. So I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah. Well, I just one thing which I would share about that is that it does. I did the mandate that I do feel for all of my good fortune is that the thing I feel most fortunate about is other than sort of the lowest on parts of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy here, you know, that are obviously everything else depends on, but is having had the luxury to develop an interest such as painting and to cultivate that to the level of fulfillment that I feel like it's been able to provide for me. And I genuinely think that this is something that everybody in some form or another is looking for. And it may not be painting, it may be whatever, but like this, a kind of a vocation in that sense. And I don't mean like, in the sense of a calling and something that they really, an activity with which they can identify and around which they understand themselves. And so I feel this is why another reason my commitment to teaching is so strong is that it's my one way. I think it's more valuable than the painting is to help somebody else find that for themselves. And I would go to great lengths to make that happen. I mean,
that's awesome.
I don't care how much experience the person has, but if you could just bestow that gift on people, that's what I would want to do. And so that's why I would just teach anybody who shows up. You know? That's
awesome. Yeah. Well, and the other thing to my point about the wealth too is I've been so blessed because there are people who have way more money than I do who are willing to pay for paintings that I could never paint without them. So it's a blessing when people are willing to support the arts, whether you're an artist who already is financially stable or whether you're a wealthy patron who is making an artist financially stable so that he or she can paint. It's a gift to the art world when an artist is able to paint what he or she feels inspired to paint. It's a gift. It's a gift. Okay, so my final question is, what advice would you give to an artist who is aspiring to do great paintings like yourself one day?
Well, without endorsing the comment that my paintings are great, I will say that what advice? I guess it would be to separate your career from your vocation. I think that your vocation is way more important than your career. I don't mean vocation like vocational school. I mean that to create space in your life for your work to be what you want it to be and to not be constrained. If my kid right now wanted to be an artist, I would tell him like you should. I think that you should go and get another skill, but so that your art can be truly free. And now a lot of people would disagree with that, but given today's environment, that would be my best bet. You know, And I think that the division that has been created between like people who make a living as an artist as being serious and people who don't as not being serious is completely nonsense. I think we have to let go. We have to completely let go of you're only a serious artist if you paint 40 hours a week. I don't paint 40 hours a week. I've never painted 40 hours a week. And I think that you are as serious as you take yourself and as serious as you make your work, and that by kind of firewalling that from the demands of your life, like if I had to have do something, you know, for a living other than teach and live off of my good fortune, I'd be a carpenter 5 days a week and I'd paint whatever I wanted on the weekends.
Would you really?
And I would. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is that because you love carpentry, or because you feel like that's what it would take to support yourself?
I feel like I would rather paint whatever I want 2 days a week than try to understand what somebody else wants. I just like the idea of having this completely sacred zone of autonomy that is totally up to you, you know, and for that to be the focus of your identity. I think that's a healthy thing to do. And so I would tell people like to try to make a division between making a living and making art, and to not let that division undermine their sense of how serious they are as an artist.
That's the first time we've heard that advice. And I think you're going to be speaking to a lot of people. So I really appreciate that. But I'm going to be honest with you. I wouldn't be happy doing something else to keep my art business going. But I think it's pretty clear from talking to you that, and that's one of the things that we don't share in common, is that like, I need to be motivated to make a living, to produce on some level. Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for me, that formula wouldn't work, but I bet there's a huge portion of this audience that formula is just absolutely perfect for.
Well, I should say that I don't mean to suggest that that's the only way to do it at all.
No, I didn't think you were. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's so far from my temperament that I don't think I could do that. So I'm amazed by people that can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't think it was, but that's why I love that advice, because, there is going to be a huge part of the audience that's like, oh, good. It's okay for me to have a job and be an artist. And I can still take myself seriously.
And I'll take you seriously.
Right.
For what that's worth.
Right. Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's great. And man, it's been a huge honor to have you on the show. And I hope we stay in touch. You seem like a great guy, and it's been fun to get to know you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.